Welcome to Smart Branding, a podcast dedicated to branding, naming, and domain names. I'm Tatiana Bonneau, and with my guests, we try to help you create and grow strong, memorable, and meaningful brands online. I believe time is one of our most precious assets, and so I want to thank you in advance if you decide to spend the next 30 minutes with us. I promise to do my best to make those worth it. Let's go. So my guest today is Andrew Rosener. He needs no introduction in the domain space, but for anyone else, Andrew is the founder of and CEO of MediaOptions, the world's leading domain brokerage, co-founder of Ganjapreneur and Apein Productions, entrepreneur, investor, and generally a trusted authority in the digital asset space. Thank you for making the time and joining us, Andrew. Wonderful having you here.
Tatiana, I appreciate the invitation, and I'm happy to talk to you today.
Great. Let's start with a bit of a background. Tell me, how did you get into domain names?
My first introduction to domain names was college. This was the mid-'90s, and I was taking a very basic HTML course. And I remember we were in the computer studio, and the professor, this, old guy with a big white beard. And he said, basically you put up this website and, somebody on the other side of the world can see what you post. And that idea for me was pretty just revolutionary. I mean, I just thought, wow, what a powerful idea. That really stuck with me. I was really thinking about, all right, wow, I want to put up a whole bunch of stuff. I'm quite hyperactive. And so, I guess the key for me was that I understood that there was this new powerful technology that was the internet. And in order to participate in that, it all started with a domain name, right? Oh, I have an idea. I want to put it online. Well, good, bad, or otherwise, you need a domain name, right? And so the first thing that clicked was just okay, this is really powerful. This is going to be a big deal. I want to participate. And the only way to do that is to have domain names to post things on. But that's it. I don't want to pretend I knew domain names were going to be the land grab of the, digital revolution. I didn't know any of that. I didn't know that these things were going to be valuable. It didn't literally never even crossed my mind that I would ever sell these domains that I was buying. It was just I want to, I've got a bazillion ideas a minute. And every time I have one of these ideas, I go get a domain for it because I may or may not, most likely will not ever do that. But when I have the ideas, I get a domain for it. So that was it. That was the beginning. And then it really wasn't until shortly after the dot-com bubble burst, basically immediately after the dot-com bubble burst. I had heard about the sale of Mark Ostrovsky selling business.com. I think it was 7 or 8 million. And so, there's a few of these outlier sales that you heard about. The media picked it up. But I didn't really think about domain names. These are valuable assets. We could sell them. Blah, blah, blah. It was just wasn't the way I was thinking about it. And then I got introduced by my now wife, but at the time girlfriend, to this Spanish ham, jamón ibérico in Spanish. And I bought these domains around the ham, and I thought, I'm going to start. I was actually in the frozen seafood business at the time, the commodity trading. And I thought, I'm going to import this ham. Why don't we have this in the US? It's the best thing I've ever had. I was in Mallorca at the time. And I found out that it was illegal. And so, sort of put that idea to the side, but I had acquired the domains. A couple of years later, I'm on my way to my office, and I heard that George W. Bush was going to get the first legally imported pata negra ham, ever imported to the U.S. And I thought, I got to get a hold of the guy. I found the importer. I was sort of talking shop with him. We were both in the food business, and it came up that I had these domains. We made a deal. Ultimately, I realized, basically the deal happened too easy. And I had absolutely no idea how to price these things. But I got the ham that I wanted, and I got, a couple $1,000s and some wine and a carving set. But as I proceeded to spend a month eating that leg of ham and drinking my Rioja, it occurred to me that like this guy's in a very niche business. And if he wanted these domains that bad, everybody in every business on earth is going to want or need their domain names. Either the domains that match their brand or the domains that match the product or service that they provide. And so that is really when I started backing up the truck. That was probably 2003. And started backing up the truck and just buying everything I could get my hands on. Now, when I say that, at the time, I didn't know that there was like an industry. I didn't know there was an aftermarket. I didn't know any of that. So I was just registering domain names that I thought were clever. And most of that was garbage. And so after, basically flushing 300 grand down the toilet, I understood that I was on the right path, meaning that I had high conviction in the idea that domain names were really valuable assets. I just understood that I wasn't good at picking which ones were valuable and what were the factors that actually made them valuable. And so then I did two things. One is I realized I need a way to create cash flow to continue in this business, to feed my habit, so to speak. And so I started brokering other people's domain names because there was really nobody at the time selling these domain names. There was like Rick Latona and Monty Khan, and they were really, for the most part, either, let's say, responding to inbound inquiries for portfolios that they managed, or they were selling domains from one domain investor to another. One guy wanted domains that had traffic. The other guy wanted domains that were great brands. One guy wanted 4 letters. One guy had 3 letters. And so there was horse trading among domain investors. And that's primarily what domain brokers were doing at that time. And so I saw an opportunity. I've been in sales my whole life. I love sales. It doesn't bother me. I was never shy about it. And so I thought, well, why don't I take these domain names that all these guys have and go sell them to, the end user that really would want or need them. Slowly but surely that worked. And I started making sales, and I was using the cash flow from the brokerage commissions to reinvest into domain names. And part of that process in speaking with end users helped me with the second part, which was to understand value. And at that time, one of the biggest factors driving domain value was SEO, search engine optimization. And in speaking with some of the smartest people in SEO in the world, I came to understand that the way to value a domain name was really about, let's say it's basically the same as if you're looking at a startup who hasn't launched yet and you're trying to understand, what could this startup be worth? What's this idea worth? What you're trying to evaluate is what's the total addressable market, and then how much of that market can you realistically expect to capture if A, B, and C goes well, right? And so I thought that was at a high level a good way to evaluate domain names. And then I went about thinking about how to measure those things and actually take that sort of theory and apply numbers to it. And I think that, other than the fact that I'm just really persistent and really, aggressive, let's say, I think that the real reason for my success was that early observation about how to value a domain name. And that set me apart in several ways. It allowed me to arbitrage domain investment opportunities that other people missed. It allowed me to move faster than other people could. And because I had a higher conviction in the value and the spread between what I could buy it for, what I thought I could sell it for. And it allowed me to speak with domain buyers in a way that nobody had ever done before, which was to say, look, there is an objective value to this domain name. And so you may not want to spend this money, but you cannot help but to understand that there is an absolutely tangible ROI for your business by acquiring this domain name. That ROI comes about in the form of increased conversion rates, increased click-through rates, increased customer retention, increased employee retention, increased employee satisfaction, increased trust with your, purveyors. There's all these things, some of them tangible, some of them intangible, that contribute to the value of the domain. And using that, I was able to then go out and, not only build what has become the top domain brokerage firm in terms of, gross sales, but also acquire a pretty, nice little domain portfolio, at the same time. They say there's an expression, the best dope never leaves Mexico. And so, it was kind of like the best deals never left my desk, right? So, by becoming, there was these feedback loops of like, well, we started selling a lot of domain names, and that means more deals were coming to us of people that wanted to sell domains. And then, that gave me more deal flow to choose the domains I wanted to buy, as well as bigger names to go out and sell. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer to your question.
No, it's cool. Like we're looking at your, background, like we're talking, like starting from the 90s and in 2023. So that could have been longer. It was okay. But
to be fair, I actually consider myself kind of a latecomer because I didn't really get full-time involved. I didn't even know that there was a domain industry until probably 2005. I think 2005 was like the first time that I found out that there was like expired domain auctions, and maybe 2004, 2005, something like that, where I found out like there were these domain investors, there was expired domain auctions, there was forums where people were talking about domains, there were people that literally did this is all they did with their life. I didn't even know any of that existed until that 2004 or 2005 period. So I did my exposure to it, and I started buying these domains, not as an investor, but as sort of a, let's say, internet participant, in the 90s. But it took me, a decade basically to, maybe 8 years to figure out the value thing.
I find that super curious because I'm like even later than you. Like I literally started, with Mark Upgrade 5 years, I think. That's probably the 6, something like that. And before that, I was in IT for like 10 years. That's pretty much everything I've been doing was, software, databases, websites. And I have been dealing with domain names all that time, but I literally never saw them as anything but like a technical detail. Like you said, you need a website, you have to have a domain name. I've given bad advice to people like, it's like, oh, if, that one is taken, put a dash or get a different extension. And I've been doing that. And so when I actually started looking at domains differently, looking at them as brand assets and as part of the very important part of the whole, brand as an entity, I was like blown away. And I actually can't even explain that logically to myself, because when, for example, like everybody went crazy about NFTs, one of the biggest, things about it and everything, like in blockchain as well, that people like, is like it's unique, it's on the internet, it's yours. And I was like, domain names have been that for 30 years. Like, why? What's the problem with that? And I don't have a huge answer, to be honest. Like, I think one of the answers I had, like trying to explain that to myself, was exactly that domain industry. And I thought it's very closed up, and it's very like,
opaque.
Yeah. And it could be like, I don't want to say like it's the fault of the industry that people don't understand and appreciate domain names more. But I think there is some improvement to be made.
Of course it's the fault of the industry. Of course. Who else's fault should it be? Right? Of course, it's 100% falls on us. Yeah.
Well, thank
Sorry
you.
to interrupt,
She
but
said
I
it.
think
She said it.
Yeah.
I didn't say it. Yeah. No, that's funny because I read your recent interview. The written one, is it on DN Journal? Yeah.
Yeah, DN Journal, Ron Jackson. Yep.
And you were saying there that like everybody thinks you're an asshole and whatever, and you're not. So now there you go. You said it. You said it's fault of the industry.
Yeah, I think I'm misunderstood.
No, I'm kidding. Yeah.
No, I'm not. Trust me, there's a lot of people that would tell you I'm an asshole. But I think I just have a very low tolerance for BS, and I'm very direct. And, I basically have an allergy to, anything that isn't just factually driven, I just hate, I don't know, hubris. It's like, I don't know, just, yeah.
Yeah. No,
so I'm very direct and maybe not so polite sometimes.
So yeah, on that with the industry, because the analogy I have is, you don't have, or you probably have, but it's very few people that would like to give an example with, Nice. And like, I have like villas and cool apartments everywhere that are listed for sale for gazillions and sitting there for years. Nobody walks in and says, why are you not selling that to me for, 50,000? Or you're a squatter, why do you want gazillions? Nobody. Like, it's just, they'll be considered crazy. And everybody does it with domains. And I'm like, why is that? And it feels like every time you start a conversation with domain or potential domain buyer, it feels like you have to walk them from like where I guess you were in the 90s, where I was 5 years ago, where it's like, oh, a domain name is that thing that you need to register to the website, to, a domain name is a like strategic asset for your brand. And you have to walk with them because it just hasn't been done.
Yes. I call it the necessary evil problem. So most people look at domain names as nothing more than a necessary evil. It's like, oh, I'm starting this new company. I'm super excited. And it's like, oh, I need to get it. And and that's a problem, right? I think that we're on a path where we'll end up is that people will observe domain names as the sort of trophy asset that they are, at least really good ones. And the funny thing is if you look at the smartest people in the world and let's say the most successful entrepreneurs in the world, both in tech and in consumer goods, there's an overwhelming majority of them who either continuously start new companies using super ultra premium domain names, or maintain a sort of secretive portfolio of domains that they've collected over the years themselves, or, in the right conditions, even advocate for domain names, right? And so you look at the top VCs, Paul Graham, huge advocate of premium oneword.com domain names, right? Fred Wilson.
Mark Benioff, I think, is also.
Mark Benioff, huge. He loves them. Also, all the A16, Mark Andreessen. There's a fascinating conversation between Ben Horowitz and Chris. What's his name? Chris, also from A16Z. Chris, can't think of his last name at the moment. That's terrible. Haven't had enough coffee yet. Speaking of which, so anyways, they're talking about, these are literally two of, let's say, the 3 to 5 most important and influential venture capitalists on planet Earth that have ever lived. And they have this they're in this long, it's like a 2-hour interview that they're just sort of talking about all the state of, tech and crypto and all this stuff. And they somehow segue into domain names. And it's almost like this passing comment that I haven't heard enough people really talk about. But all of a sudden he's like, oh, domain names. I love domain names. And I'm just like, what? I was like floored, I was like, wow, what a moment. And then he goes on to say like, oh yeah, I've got my own portfolio of domain names and, I would never sell them. And he's like, really? Never? And he's like, domain name? Why would you ever sell a domain name? This is the digital real estate of the future. And he goes on and it's like, oh my God, this guy is saying what we've all been thinking for 20 years.
Yeah.
And thought that nobody else knew. And so it's pretty seminal. I think I linked to it on on my Twitter or on our blog or something at some point. But it's a pretty I think it's on the A16Z podcast. And it's a pretty cool thing. But you're right. I mean, most people, particularly first-time entrepreneurs, they don't understand the pain of not having their exactbrandmatch.com or not having an easy to spell domain name or not, or having a prefix or a suffix, and the pain and suffering that will cause you, both in tangible results as well as marketing spend, as well as just dissatisfaction among employees, among yourself. Like every time you have to tell somebody your email address, even if you're making a restaurant reservation, it's like having to spell out your domain name, or, oh no, our brand isn't clear. It's onclear.com or clearme.com or tryclear or that, it's like, oh, but hold on, but your logo just says clear. So how can your domain not be clear? And it's this thing that I think you have to experience that pain. I've long said people respond better to the stick than they do to the carrot. And so I think people like you and I, we're trying to use the carrot to say, hey, wouldn't you like to buy this domain name? This domain name is going to be great and people are going to trust your brand more. And we're trying to dangle the carrot. And the reality is that's not how people make decisions on things that they perceive to be a necessary evil. The way that they arrive at a positive decision is through the stick. You have to beat them with the stick. And that is like, hey, look at all the email you're losing, right? Hey, look at the traffic you're losing. Hey, look at the brand confusion that's being created in the marketplace. Hey, did you see that there's 9 other people who also use your brand and are all basically competing to one day own the singular, the only exactbrandmatch.com domain name that exists? Only one of you will ever own it. And once they do, it's off the market forever. So who's it going to be? And I think people need to get whacked with the stick and feel the pain in order to change that frame from, where you were or where I was to where we are now.
Absolutely. And the thing is, it's there is also that phenomenon of people are like, oh, I'm okay with that. I can remember that name. I'm okay with whatever. And they're like lying to themselves and they're not thinking, but even if you are, and I think you're fooling yourself, what about your clients and, employees and investors and all of that? And I had a very similar problem when I was doing software and websites where people would be, that's going to be a very basic example, but you would have people literally going, can we have that color and that picture? And it's like, you're paying me to tell you how it's supposed to be. And you want me to do it the way you would have done it. Like, what's the point?
Yes. Yes.
It's a similar problem.
Yep, it is.
You said you have a portfolio of domains yourself. If it's not a secret, do you have a favorite? Like one that you like, absolutely, that's the one.
Okay. Do I have a favorite or you?
Yeah, you. Do you?
I'm particularly fond of two-letter.coms. I think I've probably owned more two-letter.coms through our various companies over the years than anybody else. I think we've owned something like somewhere between 50 and 60 of them. So I really love two-letter.coms. I think ix.com is one of my favorites. Clear.com is definitely, I think, the most valuable domain we own. And it's just an amazing brand for so many different things. I also certainly not our most valuable, but I also really like shaman.com.
Okay.
Shaman.com is a cool name. Yeah. What else do I like? Yeah, I don't know. We got a bunch of good ones. Wall.com is a good one.
Cool. And would you say we kind of touched on some misconceptions or mistakes that entrepreneurs, and like you said, I think it's very true that mostly it's first-time entrepreneurs. Like when people get through that pain of messing up once, twice, third time, then they kind of a lot easier to understand that, oh, actually it matters. But in your experience, like if you had a magic stick and you could get entrepreneurs to stop doing one thing when it comes to domains, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, easy. The number one mistake I see entrepreneurs make all the time is believing that the domain will be there some point in the future when they get around to it. I think that's the biggest mistake. And we see this all the time. Somebody hires us. They say, oh, we want to buy this big oneword.com. Oh, but we can only afford 50 grand. And it's like, well, you're not going to get it for 50 grand. They're like, well, why don't you just go try anyways? And you're like, all right, let's go kick those tires. And, you come back and you say, well, the domain is, 500 grand. And they're like, well, we can't afford 500 grand. And I say, well, that may very well be, maybe in some cases you really can't. Maybe in some cases it's just a preference of we don't want to spend the money. We could, but we don't want to spend the money. And sometimes that makes perfect business sense. But I think it's an enormous mistake to assume that the domain will be there, not only just be there, but be there at the same price at some point in the future. And I think that there's an evolving dialogue around domain names among VCs, among startups, among investors, where it's like, you know what? I can't afford to buy that domain for 500 grand today. But what I could do is, let me lock in a $500,000 asking price, right? And I'll pay you some deposit that's basically like a purchase option fee, right? So, we'll buy an option. I want a 5-year option to buy this domain name for 500 grand. And in parallel, I'm going to lease the domain from you for 5 years. It allows me to sort of build this business up to the point where I can comfortably afford to buy it for 500 grand. And so I think that that's a win-win. It allows the owner of the domain name to get the price they need or they want. It allows them to generate some cash flow from that asset, basically activate it. And then number two, it allows the business owner to build from day one on the perfect domain for their company. That has so many benefits. I can't even enumerate them, but just a couple are like, hey, think about the amount of de-risking that you're doing by building on the best brand from day one, as opposed to let me build on this other domain with a prefix or a suffix or an alternative extension. And then now I have to do a complete SEO switcheroo to rebrand from that old domain to the new domain at the time when I finally actually acquire it, if you are so lucky as to still be able to acquire it down the road. And there's an immense amount of risk that comes with that rebranding. Confusion, SEO risk, all sorts of stuff, Google. So I think that making the assumption that you can just get it at some point in the future is an enormous mistake, particularly when there are so many other ways to, skin the cat, so to speak. Like I said, lease with an option to buy, or financing, or
That is definitely something that would be great to see a bit more of, like creative deals. And I think there's a lack of, people don't even think of it as an option. I guess that's one of the problems, or it's seen as a more complex option, or I don't know, but it really would be great to see more of that. And like you said, for somebody, it's completely understandable for a new business to not be able to invest that sort of money. And it's interesting that what you hear, at least in my experience in those cases, is like, oh, we're still new. We don't know if we'll be there. We don't know if it will work, et cetera, et cetera. And it's understandable, but that's pretty much what they're saying in, private communication with me in that case, is what their compromised domain name is saying to the world, basically. Yes,
100%. That's, what? That was an amazing concise way of describing the problem. And I love that. I've never heard anybody say that, but that's exactly right. all of the problems that they're saying to you are exactly what their domain name is telling to the world. Their investors or potential investors, customers, vendors, partners, employees. And I think that if you were to distill that message down to one sentence, it's, we don't believe enough in our long-term vision.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And that's what it says. Like, you cut it, it's what it says. And so, yeah, would be, even though, yeah, it's understandable, not many startups can afford, just cash deals on those type of names. It would be great to see both buyers and sellers work on some other ways of, getting that going, because that would be just great for students.
I fundamentally believe that domain names are the commercial real estate of the digital economy, right? If the brick and mortar real estate was the, commercial real estate of the physical economy that has, persisted for, let's say, the last, 120, 130 years since the, Industrial Revolution. We are now in the digital revolution, right? And I still think we're in the very early innings of it. And domain names are the commercial real estate of that new economy, of that digital economy. And it just so happens that digital economy is the only meaningful economy on the planet that is still growing. And the detriment of the physical economy is all benefiting the digital. And so I think it is safe to assume that these domain names are, truly undervalued assets, will continue to appreciate. Price will continue to rise to closer to value. And I think that we will eventually, hopefully sooner than later, start adopting some of the tools and financial tools that we see in the commercial real estate industry. Very few businesses go into the commercial real estate, say, oh, we need an office. Let's go buy an office building. No, let's go lease it. Right. And I think that that's ultimately where we end up. Right. Is I believe that these domain names are worth 10 to 20, maybe even 100x what the market perceives them to be worth today. And so, people laugh at me and they're like, well, look, I can hardly get a company to pay me $100,000 for this domain name. And you're telling me it's worth $1 million or 10 million. And it's like, yes, it's just that we are having the wrong conversation. Their perception, the frame in which they're approaching this is that I need to buy this and I need to buy it in a single cash payment and then I own it. And it's like, well, why? Like, ask the average business owner, like, hey, when was the last time you logged into your GoDaddy account and did something with your domain name? And it's like, oh, I don't know. I don't even know the password of my GoDaddy account. And it's like, well, that's because you don't really need to touch it. You kind of set it and forget it, right? And that's it. You point it to your hosting. Things that you need to update usually happen at Cloudflare or your host. There's not much you're going to do with the domain name. You're going to set DNS up, point it to your host. You're going to set up your email. That's it. Done, right? And so does it really matter if that's in your GoDaddy account or it's in an escrow account or it's in some other managed, service? It doesn't really matter as long as you own the rights to the name. You have a path to ownership. You have a path to, there's no restriction on your growth. And I think I don't know what the missing link is to get people to reframe. But I think that's the conversation that we need to be having with entrepreneurs is that, like, look, even if you can afford to buy this domain, maybe you should just put down a deposit, buy an option, get into a lease, let the domain pay for itself. It's like, I like to use the numbers of, like, let's say it's a $500,000 domain. I think that, roughly 25 to 50 grand is the appropriate deposit to sort of buy your option. And then roughly a half a point to 1 point per month is roughly the right price to lease the name for, call it 5 years. And in that 5-year period, if you think about what's the life cycle of a startup, it's usually 5 to 8 years till there's some kind of liquidity event. And so in that 5 to 8 year period, either you're going to get traction and you're going to be growing, and that option to purchase the domain name is going to be irrelevant in the scheme of things 5 years out, or you're going to be a zero and you walk away. No harm, no foul.
Yeah.
And it's like, all right, so we're talking about a $500,000 domain. You pay 25 to 50 grand to get an option for it. I think that's table stakes. And then, you're paying $2,500 a month, maybe $5,000 a month to lease the domain. Look, there's probably nobody on your payroll that earns less than that. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, yes.
And you're telling me
don't even wanna,
the value of your company's brand, the place where all your customers interact with you, your medium of communication, your identity is not worth $2,500. Like, it probably costs you $25 or $100 a month to keep your floor clean.
Oh, no, I know.
You can't pay that to lease this name. Like, and so there's really no justifiable argument against it. It's just a framing thing. It's a perspective thing. And so I think that, our job, people like you and I who are dealing with these people who want to buy these names, is to reframe that conversation so that people understand, look, this is the commercial real estate of the digital, ecosystem. And you'd be, well advised to get your stake today, like whether that's buy it outright, get an option with a lease, finance it, whatever it is. But waiting is a futile game. It's going to blow up on you.
Yeah, definitely. That's funny, the comparison, because I've actually, I've had that where you would have like people coming on behalf of enormous companies for, name that, it's quoted at a couple of 100,000. And you're like, if you look at just the number of people working for them, they're spending more than that on coffee for a week. It's just
exactly.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, like you say, and I'm glad you said it, because now I can just jump on it and say it's the industry's fault. So we have to do a better job.
100%.
At educating people, that's one. And also, like you said, those options, people don't even think about them as an option. They're just like, see a huge number and they're like, whoa, that's, a no. Yep. And also they're probably not easy to execute on, which is again something that can be worked on.
Yep. There's also another interesting phenomenon that I think is worth discussing, which is like the ones that can't afford it. There's this bias of like, I don't want to pay $1 million for that domain name and make some domain squatting troll living in his mom's basement rich. Like, I don't want to make that guy rich. I want to make him suffer. I want to needle him down. I want to screw that guy and or girl. And, there's this perception that sort of persists since the 90s, back before there was, trademark rights and things. And these people that like, they're just like, oh, it's a domain squatter. And I'm not going to make that guy rich. And they don't realize that like the majority of the great names in the world today are owned by like, let's say 30 to 50 people in the world. Right. And those people are not domain squatters. Number one. Number two, they have a lot of money. They probably have more money than the guy trying to buy the domain in most cases. And it's like, look, you're not making anybody rich. Right? It's like, you just need to overcome that perception. But there is still this like domain squatter perception. People don't understand the difference between somebody squatting on, Yahoo with 3 O's versus, search.com, right? It's like, there is absolutely nothing wrong with speculatively owning search.com or any other generic domain, 2-letter, 3-letter, 4-letter acronym, etc. There is something wrong with owning Yahoo with 3 O's on the end, right? Like that is somebody trying to capitalize off of somebody else's intellectual property. That's an issue. There are now laws for that. There are rules for that. There are arbitration processes for that. That is a totally separate thing. There's no crossover. There's no, it's like, I don't know, like, it's like trying to compare like buying, I don't know, a new Mercedes with like going into the hood and buying like, a stolen car that's already had the serial numbers scraped off. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not, it's not apples to apples.
No. That's a really painful one, and I usually the example I give to people, and sometimes I don't even try. I'm like, just drop it, like leave it. Okay, it's not, we don't understand each other, like we don't agree with each other. It's okay, just move on. But like, I did mention I'm in Nice, and literally just like across the window, there's that huge apartment with a view to the sea, and they have like plants and everything, a little garden on the roof, and it was listed for 5 million, then 7, then 10. And when I talk to people and they're like, yeah, but that's been 5 years I'm living here. I've never seen somebody even visit. Like there's people going to water the plants sometimes. And I know the people that the estate agent that manages that. So they don't even have many visits because, it's a really niche thing. I don't know who's going to buy that, but nobody, like I wouldn't go there and say, we got a squatter, that I don't, do you know what I mean? They either inherited that or bought it, and I can think that, it would be better if they rent it maybe. So it's just used, because we have that, as you do, I would imagine, many tourist places where like you look for a place to rent and there's nothing, but everything is empty because it's for sale. But I can't blame, you can't blame people who are intelligent enough to invest in that stuff. And also, like, you do the numbers, honestly, for most of those places, like the prices are going up significantly for their, like literally for them, the value of those properties has gone up over the last year, so much so that it's more than if they had rented it. So why risk putting some people in there, and it's investment as any other. Like it's just crazy.
It's a market. It's absolutely. A market, right? And it's exactly what you said. If the market dynamic is that the value of this domain name is rising, or this apartment is rising so fast that it doesn't even make sense to rent it because the rent is so much less than the appreciation. That's just the circumstances of the market, and the market needs to adjust to respond to that. What's really interesting about that analogy, though, is it is exactly correct, and it's super illustrative for domain names. So that apartment in Nice is only interesting to a very unique, very small, very limited demographic of people, both because of the location and because of the price and other variables. Domain names. And if we look at the underlying reason why is appreciation going up, it's basically two factors, right? There's a lot of variables, but it's two factors. One, and the most important is just an ever increasing money supply, right? And so ever increasing money supply in the world, chasing a limited and more or less constant or even shrinking amount of resources, goods, and services. And so if you have a expanding money supply chasing the same amount of goods and services, those goods and services by definition need to increase, right? The price. And the second factor driving that appreciation is, let's say, market responses, which is for some reason, I live in Lisbon, Portugal. Lisbon is super hot right now. There's loads of people moving to Lisbon. And so, yes, this ever increasing money supply is driving a general appreciation across the entirety of the asset class of real estate. But in addition to that, you've got this sort of market response, which is, okay, other jurisdictions are, let's say, responding to COVID in ways that people weren't happy about. Other jurisdictions are implementing, either restrictive, real estate policies or, damaging property tax policies or, whatever. And that's causing people to leave those jurisdictions. And then at the same time, Lisbon is implementing, the golden visa and, tax advantages and NHR status advantages and all these different things that attract people to that jurisdiction. So you have some jurisdictions driving people out, some jurisdictions driving people towards them. And then at the same time, this ever expanding money supply that drives the wave of appreciation, right? In domain names, it's the same thing. It's just that eliminate the whole demographic discussion because like .com domain names are literally global. Like the potential audience is everybody, right? And so whether it's from a buyer standpoint or an audience standpoint, they are wholly unlimited. And so it gets compounded even further. And people are like, well, that domain name was $100,000, when I inquired 4 years ago. And now you're asking, $500,000. And it's like, your house was probably worth, a quarter of what it was 10 years ago or 5 years ago, right? It's just that, domain names are appreciating faster than any other asset class, including Bitcoin, because there is a limited supply of the really good ones and an ever expanding number of people getting on the internet, building new businesses, all of these things around COVID, all of these things from working at home, all of these different macro factors that are driving more and more digital businesses or existing businesses that need a digital component. So that's driving ever increasing demand. Compound that with an ever expanding money supply, and you have literally just an exponentially growing global demand for premium domain names. And so, I think that, I think that it's just people, again, it's the stick, right? It's people that person who inquired at 100 and thought it was too expensive comes back and it's now 500 and they're like blown away. The next time they inquire, it's like third time is a charm. It's like, oh, wow. Okay. This thing keeps going up and up and up and up. I better, at some point it's like, okay, pardon my language, but shit or get off the pot. It's like, the trend is not going to reverse.
Exactly. Absolutely. Do you find there's a difference in we're talking about buyers, the premium domain name buyers in different markets like the US, Asia, Europe. In my experience, for example, and I do manage a large enough number of names to say that I feel it is representative, like a huge, probably more than 80% of the inquiries are from the US, which I find funny. Another funny thing, and I could never put my finger on how it happens, but it happens, is you would have waves. There's something that happens, I don't know, like I would have a wave of people from particular country, like in Europe, which normally is a really small percentage or non-existent of inquiries for different names, not related to each other. So there are probably events that make people think about domain names and branding that I'm not aware of. I don't know, but what's your experience with that?
So I 100% agree. And it's something that I think is more, I think you said you've only been doing this for 5 or 6 years. And I think it's really in that period of time that we've really seen this change. And I think that a lot of it has to do with venture capital cycles and some of these accelerators like Y Combinator, for example, or Techstars. And I think what it is you see these classes of startups that get funded all at the same time. A VC raises a fund, they deploy it more or less in a quarter, right? And then you see all this new class of startups that have now raised funding, and they've been told by their advisors or their VCs, go out and get your domain name now, right? And so I think that's part of it. I think that also, the macroeconomic cycles drive some of this. I think that, business cycles in terms of like, okay, in first quarter of the year, there's a lot of planning going on, or the fourth quarter of the year, there's a lot of planning going on. And so we see these big booms of sales in first and the fourth quarter. I think that that's part of it, but there is definitely an element to this that isn't necessarily explainable. I'm speculating. But in terms of like differences of buyers and jurisdictions, et cetera, that's absolutely true. I don't think it's as surprising as maybe you've, sort of alluded to. Vast majority of venture capital funding is coming from the United States. The biggest, startup ecosystem is, in the United States. And so that has traditionally been, the biggest market. There's also just a propensity for risk taking, right? There's a different value system, it's like the moonshot, sort of mentality of like, okay, I've got this great idea. I'm going to go out, raise funding. and it's either going to be a zero or a hero, right? And there's no real in between. There's almost like a shameful middle ground. Like, oh, you built like a business that's just like, sort of slowly growing moderately. And it's like, that's sort of shameful, right? You need to be going, 30% month over month growth. Otherwise you might as well just die. Right. And that mentality drives sort of the, the idea, which good or bad, I think,
it's just different.
Probably it's just different. It drives that like, okay, I'm raising this funding. There's a process to this, and it's come up with a great idea, get support, get funding, go buy this domain name, and then go hardcore on building a consumer brand. Right. And in Europe, it's sort of more like, okay, let's take this one step at a time. Let's be very cautious, conserve capital. We're not going to do the same amount of ad spending. We're not going to spend, bazillion dollars on our domain name. We're not going to make enormous brand investments. In Germany, for example, it's like they almost prefer to have a hyphen in the domain name. It's the weirdest thing. And it's just different mentalities. I am seeing, though, whereas if I went back 10 years ago, 99% of my domain sales were into the US. And the other 1 or 2% was like Chinese speculators. And then, that Chinese market grew as the Chinese speculator market grew. I think some of that trickled up to the end user market. So now there is a more robust Chinese end user market, although that has been sort of teetering the last couple of years. And then we are starting to see more deal flow into Europe. We're starting to see even some deal flow into Latin America. Colombia and Brazil have been relatively strong markets. Again, these are minuscule compared to deal flow in the US. But, I think some of that ecosystem is expanding outside the US slowly, but definitely differences in mentality.
I can't remember if it was Mark Randolph or Nike's founder. It was one of those two in their books. Yeah, I don't know if it was him or Mark Randolph, but there was a story because they both have the book of how they got to build their businesses. And unfortunately, I don't remember which one of them was it, but one of them was when they arrived first to Europe and they were talking to some entrepreneur who had a very successful business in, I think, something to do with leather goods. And they were like talking to them for hours and hours and thinking, you can do this and you can explore there and you can expand this and da-da-da. And the guy was like looking at them weirdly for an hour and then went, but why? Like, I'm happy. Why would I do that? I'm happy and successful. And I think that very clearly for me is really captured that mentality of, but, I'm like, I have, a great house. I have another house. I have an apartment. I have a business that's working. Why would I want to, expand globally and basically all the headache that comes with it? Obviously, there's, the good side of it, but there's that different mentality. I think it was really well.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah. Two more questions. One is, at what point do you feel entrepreneurs should get in touch with somebody like you?
I think that great question. Look, I think the honest answer is as soon as possible, right? But the reality is like once you believe that you have the resources to make an earnest commitment to try and not necessarily, like I said earlier, not necessarily obtain outright buy the domain name that is the exact brand match for your company, but at least to make an earnest effort at acquiring a path to ownership or a path to utility. I think the sooner the better. I think look, I think really at the end of the day, I don't think it makes sense to choose a brand unless you believe that there is a path to owning the exact brandmatch.com. Because what I've seen is that there are very few exceptions. I think there's one in the Fortune 1000 that was able to achieve, let's say that type of market cap, that type of status without owning their exactbrandmatch.com. Like, do we think that Amazon would be Amazon if they had never acquired Amazon.com? If they were like Amazon Books, right? Amazon Shop, Amazon Store, like, would that be the same? I don't think so. I'm quite confident that brand value is what drove their rapid growth. And so, without a path to owning your exactbrandmatch.com, not to mention all the different services and products that have come out of Amazon that wouldn't make sense under an Amazon store, Amazon, whatever. So I think that, really it has to be at the inception point. It has to be, when you're trying to decide on your brand. I think it's, let's say, instructive to at least have a conversation with somebody, a domain broker about, is this a domain name? If I choose this brand, or really the best thing is to work backwards and look at what are the available brands in the market, and then work backwards from there to find what your brand could be based on the domain availability. I continue to believe that, it makes absolutely no sense to try and come up with a brand unless the domain is available. And when I say available, it doesn't mean that it's not owned. It means that there's a path to ownership. So yeah, I think as early as possible is the answer.
Cool. And last question, what are some, would you say, red flags to look out? So like, let's say I'm an entrepreneur, I'm launching a business, I'm looking for somebody with experience with domains, with digital assets. There are quite a few, or like somebody's approaching me for something. What are some red flags to look for? In
terms of the broker, or in terms of the domain?
No, in terms of the broker, but yeah, I guess you could say in terms of the domain as well. I mean, there has been some stories.
I think the biggest red flags in terms of the broker, I think there's several of them, but number one is if that person isn't demanding that they sign a contract with you, you don't want to work with that person, because that means that they don't have a loyalty to you. They don't have a fiduciary responsibility to you. They may be playing a spread. They may be front running. They may be, you don't know what their intentions are. I think that it is absolutely essential that you have an exclusive contract, whether you're buying or selling a domain. You have an exclusive contract with that broker. I think that is first and foremost critical. And any broker that says, "Oh, I don't need a contract," or, I don't, number one, it's a sign of weakness. And number two, it's a sign that they may be doing something that is not in your best interest. Number two, I always like to say, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. And so, any broker that is sort of in a race to the bottom in terms of their commission, again, sign of weakness, sign of incompetence. If you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, right? This is a really hard job. As you and I have just discussed for the last hour, like, very few people understand how to value a domain name. Very few people are, let's say, expert enough about domain names to shift somebody's perspective, whether it's a buyer or a seller, in order to actually consummate a deal. And so what you're paying for is that expertise. You're paying a commission fee, not for an order taker, not for somebody to just execute on some, set of instructions. You need expertise to ensure that you're getting an appropriate price, appropriate deal terms, safe execution of the transaction, and expert guidance on along the way. And then, I think, time in the business, I think is important. I'm reluctant to say that because, when I started in the business, but there's value to be had there just because of network, right? The more people the faster you can get deals done, the more trust you have, et cetera. But in terms of red flags, I think it's really about, contractual obligations and commission structure and, bullshit. Just, anybody that's trying to blow a lot of smoke, it's like, just, probably leave them alone.
Cool. All right. Well, that's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sure we could talk for like another hour, but try and keep it listenable in one go. So thank you. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been a pleasure for me as well. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in this episode of Smart Branding Podcast. Feel free to visit smartbranding.com for more information and reach out if you have any suggestions, questions, ideas, or just want to learn more about how a good domain name strategy can help you build a strong and successful brand. See you next time.